And a pleasant good afternoon to everyone. Welcome to Talk Show Presents. I'm Keith Williams, your host, and we have Dr. Mike here, well-renowned psychologist in New York. And I see that you have want to talk about new technology. It's called iPredator. And so, without further ado, please introduce yourself to the audience.
Oh, good afternoon. Well, good afternoon, good day. Thank you. Thank you for having me on. Quickly, my name is Dr. Michael Nuccitelli. I'm a New York State licensed psychologist, a cyber psychology researcher, and an online safety educator. I am the creator of a dark side of cyberspace concept called iPredator, which we'll be talking a little bit about today. Thank you for having me on. It's an honor.
I guess one of the things that, and I don't know if you've been following this, the main question that I ask is that in the past 2 years that we've been dealing with the coronavirus pandemic, how did that affect people in this country?
Well, that's a great question to ask. Unfortunately, there's very little data about that right now. What I can say, the scant little bit of research that I've reading as it relates to iPredator is made up of 8 different types of online assailants. But what I've understood to be suggested, we won't know for another year or two, is that there has been an increase in cyberbullying, cyber stalking, cybercrime, and essentially of the 8 different types of iPredator, 7 of the 8 different types, I think what we're going to see is that there was a significant increase.
I know there's not enough data to support the question that I asked, but I just kind of want for you to give your personal analysis,
Sure, thank you. Well, I mean, my doctorate degree is from Adler University. God bless Alfred Adler. But what Adler believed is that, we are social creatures. We come into this world, we go out of this world. We're looking to be accepted, to be recognized, and to be validated. We're social creatures, okay? So if you're into evolution, we are social pack animals, okay? So whatever you believe, you have to say we are social creatures. Well, what we've seen through COVID, what did we have? We had quarantine. We had people sometimes masks on, masks off, quarantine, where the community individuals were isolated for periods of time. We had those individuals that lost loved ones due to COVID. So the COVID pandemic was, and still is a serious situation that had a negative impact on society, just like all pandemics do when it comes to a community. So what I think we're going to see is that it's going to show a significant increase in online deception, online aggression, and all the different types of iPredator.
Also, during the pandemic, we have seen an increase in domestic violence cases.
Almost certainly, exactly, aggression. Right. So my theory of iPredator is a dark side of cyberspace concept. So it's rooted in cyber psychology, but it's also rooted in criminal psychology, forensic psychology, whatever you want to call it. It is assuming that all of us, which anybody's interested, you could read my concept that I wrote in 2006 called Dark Psychology, but we all have a dark side aspect to us. Thank God. I mean, Carl Jung called it the shadow. So I didn't create anything new when I created Dark Psychology. But what I believe is, just like many of those of us that work in behavioral health care, is that there's a dark aspect about us. And when we are stressed, when the community presents itself, such as a pandemic, is it increases our proclivity to become aggressive, to become abusive, and to engage in deception. And that is what really dark psychology is about, and iPredator is the information age manifestation of what people are doing, which what they've done since the beginning of human civilization. But in a pre-information age world, it was all done offline. And now that we have social media and we spend most of our waking lives online, a lot of it's being done using digital devices and in cyberspace.
I think you mentioned something about human beings being social creatures.
Mhm.
Um, so how did that affect the pandemic? It was obviously, for most of the pandemic, we was, on lockdown, our
Mhm.
businesses closed. We
Exactly. Well, you hit the nail right on the head, my friend. We are social creatures. So whether it is being part of family systems, we are part of a social system. We're part of a community. As I said, if you're into evolutionaries, and we believe we're nothing more than animals, we are social animals. We have been since the beginning of human civilization and have evolved that way. So that's going to continue. So when you have a pandemic and there's quarantine, essentially what happens is people become isolated. Okay. And when we are isolated is when we are alone, either essentially literally alone, or what I call psychological isolation. I do believe there are individuals, whether it be because of an Axis 1 psychiatric illness, psychological dysfunction, as I call it, psychological isolation, where the best way to describe that is that you can be in Yankee Stadium filled with fans and people, but yet you can still be psychologically isolated in your mind. So what the COVID pandemic did is it essentially exasperated that aspect about all of us, to where people were feeling more lonely, more angry, and more aggressive when it comes to acting out upon their feelings.
I think fear. We can also put that.
Almost certainly, sure. With the fight or flight, that's an excellent point. I should call you doctor. Is that fear is a major motivator, fight or flight. Okay, so when we as humans, as animals, again, however you want to see it, fight or flight, when we experience fear, the two, I mean, obviously there's some other, is fight or flight. Some of us, there's also elements of paralysis where people don't do anything. But basically, as social creatures, as animals, it's fight or flight. So when we're afraid, we do something about it. We either run or we fight back.
Right. And so in this case, we're seeing, especially older Americans,
Mhm.
you know, uh, they still feel that COVID is out of control. They're not out in society as much. They're still cooped up with still, dealing with that. So we really had to, meet them, where they are, because, uh, they still, uh, they still, they're here, so that, they still need, access to the basic necessities.
Exactly. So, but what we're seeing is for both old folks, the older adult generation, your baby boomers, your early stage of your X gen, I'm X gen, all the way down, but also for children, teens, and young adults, where families, parents are mandating their children to restrict their activity. And we're not out of the woods yet. I mean, many of us, seem to think that we can walk around without our masks. Here in New York City, mask wearing is not mandated per se, but some places of business still require or encourage you to wear a mask to maintain social distance, so forth and so on. But again, we are social creatures, and for over 2 years now, we've been asked to what? Maintain social distance, to maintain a distance. And when you think about that, that is, I don't want to say antisocial because that is more criminal, but asocial, not engaging in social activity.
I must commend the state of New York for having ending uh, mental health, as a mental health as a resource, New York is like one of the top. I have to commend you on that. I get a lot of correspondence from people who live in New York, those who are in the mental health profession, is either psychologists, psychiatrists, or even those who engage in peer support. That New
Exactly.
York has one of the best, you know, statewide has a, mental health is outstanding.
Mhm.
I'm here in Alabama, and I can tell you that for example, the mental health department here in the state of Alabama, it sucks.
Oh, I'm
You know,
sorry.
it really, it really sucks. It's like really hard to,
Mhm.
it's really hard to get like certified, in anything. Because they have this application to where, for example, that you can be a peer support specialist. I think I filed maybe 2 or 3 times, and I have not heard an answer for them at all. And then when
Mhm.
I do call them, their response is like really vague. Mental health here in Alabama is terrible. It's terrible here, and it shows.
And I'm sorry for that. Here in New York, so by day, I am a clinical psychologist. I have my own group practice called MN Psychological Services. Anybody who sees that here in the New York area, if you'd like to join, if you're a psychologist, social worker, all but licensed, feel free to write, because we're always looking to grow our practice. So we provide supportive and validation therapy to the chronically mentally ill in residential facilities here in the New York City area. And the chronically mentally ills, those that suffer from pretty serious axis 1 disorders, such as schizophrenia, thought disorders, schizoaffective, major depression, some dementia, some bipolar, so forth and so on. These are individuals, although they're adults and although they've suffered with these mental illnesses for decades, they truly were seriously negatively impacted from COVID, the pandemic, and everything that went along with it. At different facilities, we had an increase in many deaths due to COVID, but also just the fear of what it means to have COVID, the fear of being affected. And in the early stages, as you know, with COVID, everybody was afraid that once they would be infected, they would die. And that did happen in some standpoints. I myself, as an essential worker, being a psychologist, I would have went anyway, not that I had to be mandated, but we here in New York, essential workers were mandated to go to work, which we did. What I did offer for some of my therapists is that they could do what's called teletherapy. They could see their clients / patients via computer. Some of them did, but the vast majority of us showed up every day and did our job, because when you're dealing with the chronically mentally ill, it can be incredibly frightening, and it can exacerbate psychotic episodes, so forth and so on, when you're afraid. So just like you brought up before, fear, fight or flight. And that's what we saw.
So we also saw an increase in like high levels of anxiety, and stress that's associated with COVID-19, and that caused some other, health problems.
Oh,
That's what
most
happened.
certainly. Most
That's what
certainly.
happened to my. That's what happened to. That's what happened to my dad. The COVID, triggered. He was like really stressed about it. Anxiety levels was extremely high,
Mhm.
and that brought on a number of other. That triggered all these other illnesses, and it eventually succumbed him. He died in June of this year, about 2 months.
Sorry. I'm sorry that happened.
September 4th would be 3 months.
Mhm.
Um, so he did die of complications of, and he was like the whole time he was admitted in the hospital in January. of this year, spend maybe about 4 months there because before he was to come. And one of the things that he was like really, stressed over was, the fact, was, is my mom gonna be taken care of?
Mhm.
What about the kids? Are they gonna be okay? He was so worried about that he really didn't focus or pay attention to the fact that he was ill because he was too worried about other things.
Right.
And so
Fortunate.
that kind of have a toll on people as well. I heard a lot of conversations about that as well. And Alabama is no different all across the country. I seen an increase in people getting counseling and therapy on a whole number of issues, especially in the domestic relations department, finances,
Mhm.
um,
Well, I can
health,
tell you
everything.
with my patient caseload, I have 55 patients. I see my patients at an adult care facility where all these individuals, these residents, is where they live, and they would come down, on a daily basis. And predominantly, I spent most of my time assuring my patients that it's going to be okay. Now, obviously, meanwhile, it's kind of hard to say everything's going to be okay when we had residents who had contracted COVID and died. We had, people from the community who contracted COVID and died. So really, COVID, the pandemic, well, it's still going on, but not nearly like it was, had a major impact on society. And it'll be interesting to see going forward, particularly as it relates to, as you said, domestic violence, what's going on online. But I strongly believe that we're going to see an increase in internet trolling, cyber stalking, cyberbullying, and the vitriol and nastiness of what people do online to one another, because that's what iPredator is. iPredator is the 8 different types of online aggressors.
And I guess we really need to have a conversation about that because in the last 2 years, with pretty much the country, being on, lockdown, we saw two things. We saw an increase in domestic violence cases, and we also began to see that, you know, with us being locked down, people flock to social media, meetings on Zoom, Google Hangouts, whatever you want to call it. And those times has been like really tense.
Goodness,
And
and let's not forget, from an educational standpoint, online learning, then the new phenomena, which it's been around for a while, but it's called VLE, virtual learning environments, the acronym being VLE. And that is actually a cyberbullying tactic that I, introduced as part of the 42 that I introduced about what children do to one another. VLE, cyberbullying. That's what we saw during this pandemic, where in online learning environments, children would target one another. And it's called VLE, cyberbullying. So from the child all the way to adults during the pandemic and afterwards, we have seen an increase in cyber attacks, child on child online aggression, and just overall, as you said, offline domestic violence, domestic abuse, all of it. Essentially, what the pandemic brought, and hopefully it'll begin to pull back, is the dark side of what it means, the dark side of human consciousness, what I call dark psychology, the dark aspect of all of us. Pandemic seemed to have brought that out, and not all, but some of us.
um, yeah, I have to agree with you because during this pandemic, I find myself being more, stressful and, aggressive and, tend to, snap at people like very angry.
Mhm.
Um, particularly, particularly because, people, they do stuff that I highly don't recommend, and I definitely don't, agree with it. And then they respond, like, for example, I'm gonna give you an example. Um, Here in Birmingham, we had an issue, where there's been illegal street racing going on. And as a result, a couple of people were killed.
Mhm.
Well, guess what the city council, response to that? Get more cameras.
Right.
And I'm like, is that your response to everything?
Mhm.
And one city councilor, responded with a very bait, answer, hoping that, that I would shut up. And I was like, that's supposed to make me happy.
Right. Well,
I'm like,
if I
do
may,
something different.
I do not to therapize you, but this is what I, say to all my patients. It applies to me. And, it's that if you find yourself getting upset more and getting angry at your community, at others, even when you are validated and you are correct in your analysis for what is upsetting you, what happens when we get upset? It applies to all of us. Our heart rate goes up, so we increase our blood pressure, we increase our cardiac issues. And what we do is with the secretion of cortisol throughout our body, stress is it has an immune decrease function. So it increases our risk of having a heart attack, of having a stroke, and getting sick. So that is why, I encourage, when we get upset, it's warranted. We're humans. But if you are a religious person, it's praying to God. If you're atheist, agnostic, non-religious, is accessing philosophy and or different type of mantra to kind of filter it. Because when we don't filter those negative feelings, okay, it only leads to us getting sick.
So do you believe in the universal the universality of psychology that says that, that as human beings we always tend to seek pleasure, rather than dealing with hostility?
Well, that's also called the pain pleasure principle.
Mhm.
I think it's both. Again, I'm trained. My doctorate degree from Alfred Adler. Adler is Adlerian concept. I'm also very much into Carl Jung. I also subscribe to the philosophy, which I love, of cosmic insignificance. Cosmic insignificant is the idea is that we are but a speck, in the Carl Sagan said, the pale blue dot on this planet that is surrounded by billions and billions and billions of galaxies made up of billions of stars. So we are nothing more than a tiny speck. So when I think of cosmic insignificance, that is when I immediately feel humble, gratitude, and I use that to chill me out. But the university of pain and pleasure, sure, being social creatures, we want pleasure, but reality, not to be existential, forgive my French, but shit happens. It is what it is. And, life is not made up of all flowers and wonder and the pleasure. Not that, so we may want it, but reality doesn't allow us to have pleasure. If anything, if we subscribe to the notion of Buddhism, Buddhism assumes the notion of suffering, that creatures come in and we go out and we have to deal with suffering. So it is dealing with the present. It is being humble. It is thanking God or thanking whatever in your present state of affairs.
So have people accepted the fact that, okay, even though that I, seek pleasure, that I have they accept the fact that, I got to go through some pain. So overall, has humanity accepted that fact?
Well, no, I mean, pleasure, if we go into the notion of the pain and pleasure idea, it is, you know, Everything, as you know, is everything in moderation. So when it comes to pleasure, pleasure can lead to, if not practiced or involved with moderation, can lead to addiction. Having a couple of drinks, is pleasurable, enjoy the disinhibition. It's fun to have a little bit of buzz with your friends. But if you do it too often and you do it too frequently and you increase, the frequency and amount of, let's just use drinking, you can become an alcoholic. Some people enjoy moderate gambling. Some people like to smoke a joint. Whatever we are seeking to experience pleasure, if we're not careful, it can become destructive, and we can be self-destructive creatures. And that was what Freud had said was Thanatos, the death instinct, is what, one of his aspects is that we're all looking to really screw up our lives.
The reason why I say that is because I think back in 2008, I studied psychology at Liberty University.
Mhm.
And one of my courses, we was asked to develop our own theory of counseling and psychotherapy
Mhm.
as our final project, which, by the way, that paper actually turned into a miniature book. And
Mhm.
in that project and in that paper, I mentioned that the whole basis of why we experience mental illness, comes from some sort of, outside, circumstance. It could be a person, it could be an event, it could be a circumstances, or it can be or it is spiritual,
Mhm.
which I mentioned in my paper. Of course, Liberty University is a highly conservative Christian university, and I got into a lot of trouble,
Mhm.
because of that. But I stood my ground. It actually turned into a theory, which now looking back at the pandemic, I discovered that, when I go back to that paper, I discovered that during the pandemic, that's what happened. When we hit COVID and pretty much the whole world shut down, and we found ourselves in isolation, a lot of people's mental health took a toll. I seen an increase of people with depression and anxiety, stress, psychosis, you name it. So
Well,
going back
yes,
to my paper,
the
going back to
unpredictable.
my paper, that was evidence that, hey, that, I may have something, going on there, that what I was saying in that paper, was actually true.
Well, the
And by
one
the way,
thing,
folks,
if
I'm,
I
I'm,
may,
I'm sorry.
as human, as Homo sapien, human beings, we have a very difficult time dealing with unpredictability.
Mhm.
We live for power and control, is being able to predict our environment, future events. That is when we are the happiness, is that when we know what's going to happen an hour, tomorrow, next week, if we can do that. But
Right.
anytime, the environment becomes unpredictable, it's also called the stress diathesis model, is when the environment presents circumstances that can create unpredictability, our anxiety, our anger, our, the fight or flight, all of that seems to kick up. And that is what we've seen with the COVID pandemic. My expertise, getting back to iPredator, it is, understanding that when you go online, there is the possibility you may come across iPredators. And if you'd like, real quickly, I could, tell you the 8 of them real quickly, or we can move on, whatever you prefer.
Well, yeah, I was going to, get into the eye predator, as you're talking about. So I was going to get into that. So please proceed.
Sure. Okay. Well, iPredator is made up, as I said, is of 8 different types of online aggressors, assailants, or types of online aggression. So for children, it is cyberbullying. That is child on child cyber attacks. The adult form of cyberbullying, which applies to adults, can happen with children, is cyber harassment, cyber stalking, and internet trolling. Then we have, which many of us know about, is cybercrime, cyber criminals, cyber terrorism, which we haven't experienced yet. And then the most perverse and deviant of the 8 typologies is online child predation and online child pornography consumption and distribution. So those 8 types is what makes up iPredator. Now, very quickly and very simply and very easy, I'm not the smartest guy, is how do you, or if somebody that you're dealing with online is an iPredator? First of the criteria, number 1, is the use of information technology. We're doing it right now. The use of information technology, social media, whatever it may be, to harm another online user. 2 is a self-awareness of causing harm to somebody else using information technology. That one can be a little bit difficult at times because some children, when they're cyberbullying, they're not doing it to harm. They actually think, again, they're immature. They think it's a joke when it really isn't a joke. Okay, so 2 is a self-awareness of causing harm. And then the third criteria is using what I call cyber stealth, which is online deception, either to completely hide your identity of who you're targeting or skewing your identity or your motivations and your drives so as you can have what's called, I hate to use this term, culpable deniability. So even if you're targeting, let's say, your ex-wife or an ex-loved one, she knows it's you, but the way you're doing it, the way you're targeting it, you're presenting yourself in a way that doesn't clearly show that you're being a cyber stalker. So if you meet those criteria, whatever the 8 different types are, you are an iPredator. iPredator.
Yeah, I seen I seen that a lot when there was a rise in the Me Too movement, and you have you know you know you had a lot of women talk about the fact that all men are capable of being what you call an eye predator, and stalking women and all that. I've seen that. And I also seen, probably to this day, a lot of internet trolling.
Well, yes, that is definitely internet trolls. That is, again, I would say the last different trolls. Internet trolling is one of, as I said, is the, not to say that because children can internet troll one another, children can internet troll adults, but the adult manifestation of cyberbullying, because cyberbullying applies to child on child cyber attack, but internet trolls applies to adults. Okay. Not to say that children don't troll, because they certainly do, particularly in online gaming environments. But internet trolls is defined as provoking, harassing, and inflaming to provoke another online user. Okay. That is your classic internet troll. The concept that I introduced a couple of years ago is what I call is predatory troll. The predatory troll is the evolution from the classic troll to what we're seeing now, to where predatory trolls, they're not looking just to piss you off. They're going after you, your job, your loved ones, your livelihood. They are doing anything they can to completely destroy your trustworthiness, your integrity, your online presence. And I call them predatory trolls. For them, it's not just about provoking you. For them, it is literally focused on completely destroying your reputation and your means of surviving.
Why do you think people, why do you think people are engaging in that type of behavior?
Well, that's a philosophical question. Thank you for asking. I wish I could give you a straight out answer. University of Manitoba did a huge study back in 2014 on internet trolls. Excellent. And I throw it up in trolls' faces all the time. And what they found was that internet trolls, in terms of their psychology, their personality traits, they were at much higher rates of being Machiavellian, which is ends justify the means, higher rates of being psychopathic, narcissistic, and sadistic. So those 4 called the dark tetrad. So internet trolls are at much higher rates of having these 4 personality characteristics. And that is the psychology, let's say the cyber psychology of what I call iPredator. Now, if you look at online child predators, these are people, these are typically men, okay? There's a couple of very small are women, vast majority, but these are men who are pedophiles and they are looking to engage in child molestation. When it comes to online child pornography consumption and distribution, some of them are pedophiles, but many of them are heterosexual and they're involved in this deviant practice of consuming and selling child pornography for what? The almighty dollar. So those individuals, they may not be pedophiles, but they certainly are psychopaths by engaging in such horrid, deviant, illegal behavior.
What about someone who uses social media, for example, to deceive people or try to take your identity? Like, for example, on Facebook, I see to where, it could be any topic that people, would talk about on Facebook,
So you're
right?
talking about identity theft.
Yeah.
Identity theft, sure, that is done all the time where, on Facebook, on social media platforms. Usually identity theft falls in the realm of cybercrime, where identity theft, where an online user is stealing, accessing your identity so that they then can go and get into your bank accounts and really, engage in criminal activities. But you also have identity theft, also called impersonation, where you have people that create, social media profiles with your name, your face, your likeness, and then they go out and what they do is they try to destroy your reputation. So impersonation can be done for a myriad of reasons: to steal from you or to character assassinate your reputation.
Yeah, I seen there where, people were, use someone else's name. Like, for
Mhm.
example, they may say, well, I admire your post, and I want to be your friend. Click on my profile
Right,
and send me a friend request. I
right,
seen that, and I seen where this person has changed my life. Click on this link, you'll thank me later. I seen that too.
right.
Or
So,
they'll
and
say,
I'm
congratulations,
right,
or
real
they'll say,
quickly.
congratulations, you won a cash prize.
Yes,
Go to
if I
this
may,
website.
anything you
Or they may post, or they may impersonate a company like, Amazon.
Yeah, unless that's an online safety, that is a cyber attack prevention tip that we can say right now, is that never click on an attachment in emails, click on a link unless you are 110% sure that the online user who's asking you to click on something, you absolutely are guaranteed know it is that person, because the vast majority of hacking, of malware, of spyware, of cyber criminal is when a person, out of your sheer ignorance, out of human error, they click on a link, and all of a sudden, that is when, they get hacked. So right there, I never, ever click on links, never.
And not to mention fear and desperation, because right now the economy is not all that great.
Exactly.
People are working 2 or 3 jobs and they still cannot pay their bills, and people are like really you know desperate.
Right. Well, they're at it.
Finances is like one of the reasons, in my opinion, is probably one of the reasons why we are dealing with mental anguish, and people are desperate. They're willing to, do anything, not knowing that they're going to turn a bad situation and make it worse.
Or well, desperate times require desperate measures right. So when people are desperate, we do things. And this kind of goes back to what I'd like to introduce is this idea, for your viewers, is called odor, which is a subconcept of iPredator. And what ODER is the acronym for offline distress dictates online response. And essentially what that means is however my offline life is going, whether I'm happy, I'm sad, I'm under the influence of a mood, mind altering chemical, whether I'm financially distressed, whether I'm grieving for the lost one, whether I have COVID, whatever is going on psychologically offline, I believe, I can't prove it yet, directly impacts what I do online. Now, information, there's only three ways information can be managed / manipulated. We can compile information, we can disseminate information, and we can exchange information. Those are the only three. All right. But if offline, you just had a major argument with your loved one, you just lost your job, you just had too many more drinks than you should have, you're just pissed off at somebody that you had an argument with. When you come online, if you're not careful, you will show that, and you will engage in higher risk online activities, is what I believe. So it's understanding that the way my offline life is, all right, what's going on, has a direct effect what I do online. ODER, offline distress dictates online response.
Yeah, I just learned something new today.
Oh, I hope so. I hope your viewers actually think, some of the stuff that we're talking about is not nonsense. I have volunteer. I finally wrote, started jotting down aspects of iPredator back in 2008, 2009. I didn't actually write it, because I tend to be ADD. It was in 2010. But for the last decade now, it's going on 12 years, I have volunteered after work and on the weekends, helping people, providing confidential help of people that have been cyber attacked, who are, the children who have been cyberbullied, dealing with the parent, adults who have been cyber harassed, trolled, or so forth and so on. And it's amazing that here we are in 2022, and it's only getting worse, And one of the things that I've learned is that, psychologists call it subjective processing, okay? Our perceptual glasses, what my upbringing, my genetics, my, life, the way I am now directly affects my subjective processing. It's how I interpret things, okay? That occurs offline. ODER, offline distress dictates online response, is this, but I believe there's an extra additional layer because we're dealing with online interactions that I believe causes us to be different and respond differently online. And that's what I call ODER. Offline distress dictates online response. It is subjective processing, which is part of the way we interpret our environment, but it's how we're interpreting our environment from a digital standpoint. Sorry for that long-winded definition, but to me, it's very important because the vast majority of my volunteer work and people that I've helped, they have gotten in trouble online because they were pissed off, they were depressed, they were discouraged, and then they go online and they say and they do things where they end up regretting.
Right, and it stays on social media forever.
That's another thing, my friend, that people don't understand. It's even hard for me to understand, and I've been doing this for years, is what you can compile information, you can disseminate information, and you can exchange information. The disseminate and the exchange of information is going out into cyberspace. You can delete it, you can remove it, you can ask everybody to delete it. That doesn't mean it disappears. What we put online stays there forever. That to me is, blows a gasket in my mind, trying to understand, trying to wrap my head around it. So I tell folks all the time, be careful what you put online, because God forbid it can come back to haunt you. And it has. I've helped people where it has come back to hurt them, where they actually lost jobs.
Yeah, we seen that. I've seen that a lot. in the last 5 years. A perfect example would be what happened in Washington, D.C. last January, when
Mhm.
you had thousands of people, storming the Capitol, and they actually filmed themselves on social media. I mean, we talking about people from all we talking
Exactly.
about we talking about people, professional people, blue collar people,
Mhm.
politicians, people that was running for office. They was at the Capitol involved in an insurrection, and they was filming themselves
Yeah, let's be
live
selfies.
online.
Woo. I know it's,
And next thing you know, they crying and boohooing because the FBI has spot them out. I mean, come on, y'all. I mean, that's just utterly ridiculous. I'm like, and we got folks from all over the country, that was there, including here in Alabama. There's some folks that I know,
Mhm.
that was there too. And I was like, what the hell are you doing there?
Right. So, but
I
when we
mean,
talk about what you just said, it even applies to, and I know your viewers that are in love or in romantic situation, they're going to get pissed off what I'm saying, but is never, ever, and I say this almost every interview I do is for the lovers, the husbands, the wives, the fiancés, even if you're having, sexual, overnight, one night, whatever it may be, never share, exchange sexual content online, whether it be sexting, which is text messaging, sexually themed content, images, and certainly not video. Why? Because God forbid you end up in an adversarial divorce. You end up in an adversarial breakup. That person that you are no longer having sex with is pissed off at you. We now have these two concepts called revenge porn and sextortion. And the havoc those two aspects, those two cyber crimes are causing people is amazing. Sextortion and revenge porn. If you don't believe me, Google it and you'll learn.
so let's go back to cyberbullying, cyber
Mhm.
attacks, among children.
Mhm.
Is there a correlation to that and a lot of the school shootings that have taken place in the last 15 to 25 years?
Well, okay. If we again, I hate to say I love to, but I study again in my past life. I was a forensic psychologist. I study the dark side, whether it be from a religious aspect. Not I'm a religious man, but I do study from a theological the concept of evil. From the criminological standpoint, is studying the criminal mind, the psychopath. Some others believe in the sociopath as well. So it's understanding that when it comes to that dark aspect of us, particularly for children, when we're dealing with sexting and sextortion, we're talking about people holding one another hostage and disseminating sexually themed content that will be sent to your loved ones, your church, your parents, whoever it may be. And it can completely destroy an individual. I mean, we're now dealing with, we are the first, if I may say, civilization, those of us living in the information age, we have been introduced to the concept of cyberbullying. And what is cyberbullying? Cyberbullying is a child that takes his or her life, commits suicide because he or she is being cyberbullied, is being taunted and targeted online. What we adults fail to realize, those of us that are baby boomers, that are X-Gen, we grew up where bullying occurred on the school ground, in the schools, on the play field, so forth and so on. Now, bullying still occurs. It happens in the schools and on the sports field. But then when the victim, the bullied child, I was bullied, when they come home now, here in the information age, it doesn't stop because now they're cyberbullied. So for today's children, there is no sanctuary, there is no escape. So they are bullied while they're at school, while they're on the playgrounds and on the sports fields or in the social environments where kids go. And then when they come home on the weekends, during holidays and cyber break, what happens? They're now cyberbullied. So now we have cyberbullying. There is no escape, and there's no sanctuary for children who are targeted due to cyberbullying. That's why it's so serious.
You mentioned something about the dark side. Was it dark psychology? I think it was.
Yes, I wrote a concept. It's at the website. It's free to anybody, called Dark Psychology back in 2006. And dark psychology, essentially the dark side of human consciousness. And that what I believe is, just like many do, is that we all have this dark aspect about us. But what I believe with dark psychology, because I also am a big lover of cosmology, black holes, astronomy, is that within all of us, I believe there is an aspect, there is a place within all of us, whether you call it soul, whether you call it, human consciousness, that that I believe is pristine evil, is the darkest of the dark. We don't access it, but for those that become serial killers, those that become pedophiles, those that become, rampant mass shooters, they come close to what I call the dark singularity, but they never reach it. We all have that aspect about us. We all, as we walk through life, I have never met a person who has not had a violent thought. Okay, all of us, as we walk through life, have violent, vitriolic, mean thoughts and fantasies, but thank God we don't act upon them. Unfortunately, some do. And this is why we have sexual sadists, we have serial killers, we have mass shooters that go into the dark realm where there's no turning back. Dark psychology. So dark psychology is the study of the dark side of human consciousness.
How do most people, does not get that far? I mean,
Well, that's a great question. For some, it's religion. I'm not a religious man, but I do, I like to learn a little bit about Buddhism. I had Catholicism jammed down my throat as a child, nothing against the Catholics. So religion, society in and of itself, genetics, okay, even as a very young child. My mother said, again, God rest her soul, she's been gone for many years. She had said I would take the snowmobile and I would fill a bag with canned soups, and I would go down with my snowmobile, and this is at 8 years, 9 years of age, and I would give canned soups to the bums that would live along the train tracks. Now, I wasn't doing it then at that early age because I thought it would pay off, fourfold. I think it was more genetic. So genetics plays a role, our environment plays a role, and then obviously free will plays a role.
I have a few more questions and then we're going to wrap up here.
Sure.
So what is in relationship to COVID-19? What is the state of mental health?
I think that's a good question. I think that depends on the individual in the community. Here in New York, obviously I am I don't want to give exactly where I am because there may be trolls that are watching. You never want to give out personal information about yourself as best as possible. So I live within the 5 boroughs of New York City. It's many millions of people that live here. And what we have seen is that in certain areas of New York City, some of the boroughs and some of the areas within each borough, COVID was really, really bad and had a major negative impact on New York City. So here we are, and we are midway going into the 3rd and 4th quarter of 2022. And as I said earlier, COVID is still something that we all have to be concerned about. When I go to work on Monday morning, I have my mask on. The residents are encouraged to wear their mask. All of us, including the residents, of the 106, I think maybe there were 2 who didn't, but I've had both vaccination shots plus the booster. And the vast majority of residents have had both shots and the booster. And it'll be interesting to see going forward what happens. Right now, and again, it's understanding I work with the chronically mentally ill. And I don't know if it would have occurred, but right now, monkeypox seems to be the talk of the resident population that I'm working with, because it's talked about quite a lot on the news. Now, the patient population that I'm dealing with, they're at a low probability of contracting monkeypox, but at the same rate, I don't know if they're hypersensitive because we're just coming out of COVID, or they would be like that anyway. But the chronically mentally ill, at least the populations that I'm working with, they're on edge. They're worried. They're worried about, is there going to be a new strain of COVID? What is this monkeypox? What's going to happen next? Are we going to be quarantined? Am I going to have to get more shots? Are more people going to die? So that is real. I deal with that on a daily basis. And not to go into my treatment goals and my treatment plans, but every resident, every patient I have in their treatment plan, it is one of the goals is COVID-19 prevention education and anxiety management related to the COVID pandemic. That is in every one of my 55 patients.
Yeah, I think everyone should. I think everyone should, in the mental health field should have some type of program or initiative or plan
Mhm.
for that. So that's very good. Um, so you mentioned the state of mental health. Is it good? Is it bad? Where are we heading at right now?
Well, I think, again, I think it depends. You had mentioned earlier, which I did not know, that Alabama is appalling when it comes to mental health. For me here in New York, I'm within the behavioral healthcare profession. So I kind of think I'm doing an okay job. I work my ass off during the day, and then after working on the weekend, I volunteer helping those that are being cyber attacked. But I think from a national standpoint, I think we're doing okay. I think the way it was all rolled out, I think in the beginning stages, I don't know if fear tactics were used. What I do know, though, is here, living where I live, a lot of people died, but there was also what I believe is a lot of fear mongering as well. But we won't
That's
know.
nationwide.
I'm sorry?
Yeah, that seems like a nationwide thing. Fear mongering is
Right. And
going.
unfortunately, it's gotten broken down into politics, whether you're Republican, Democrat, left wing, right wing, progressive, so forth and so on. The reality is, whatever your religious affiliations are, we're all humans, and we're all here to try to survive and to be able to enjoy a little bit of our short lives here. And when COVID came around, again, this happened back in the 1920s with the influenza pandemic. So this has only been a matter of what, a century, it happened again. And we are adjusting to something that we didn't know. Many people don't realize with the influenza, there were thousands of people that died worldwide back in 1920 during the influenza pandemic. And here we are a century later, and it happened again. We can only hope that, if it's to happen again in the future, we're going to be prepared and we'll be able to deal with it in a more functional manner.
Yeah, I think this kind of, I don't think that we was like totally prepared for this. It just kind of like, hit us. So, I mean, from a worldwide standpoint.
I can admit to you, and I'll admit it right now, in the beginning stages, what are we talking about? Forgive my time. 2019 is when, in the beginning stages of COVID, I had said to myself and a couple of my, this is just a passing phase. If anything, I'd said, I do, and I hate to say it, I said to me, the news, they're probably blowing it out of proportion. They're looking to generate revenue. Boy, was I wrong. Okay, so here we are 2.5 years later, 3 years later, and I was very wrong in the beginning. And thank God now I understand that, pandemics are real. A lot of people died. Not a lot of my patients, a couple of my patients, there were, a couple of residents at other facilities, a couple of the hospitals had a lot of death due to the pandemic. And not just due to the COVID pandemic per se, but kind of like what you brought up before, which is also, I mean, death and illness. There were people due to the anxiety of the COVID got sick. They didn't get COVID, but they became very sick due to other illnesses because of the decrease in immune system, because they were upset or anxious and frightful due to the COVID. So you have to throw that in there too. We
Yeah.
lost people not because they contracted COVID, but because they had heart attacks or strokes due to the anxiety related to going through a time of COVID.
Um, how are people able to find you? They want to know more information about you and what you do, how people will be able to find you.
Well, it's, thank you for bringing that up. Everything at my website. I don't know if you can see it behind me. I don't know if when you publish this, it'll be read backwards. So when you're looking at it, do you see, is it starting with I or an R? Because when I see it, it looks like it's backwards. So essentially,
No, actually on here is
it's correct. It says
yeah,
iPredator.
yes, it's correct. iPredator.
Okay,
That's
so
how people,
essentially my entire website and everything I've created is free, public domain and educational. You're welcome to print, download, share any of my content. You don't even have to give an email, no personal information to download my work. Goodness, I have 28 different assessments, checklists, inventories that you can print out, that you can save to your desktop, that range anywhere from cyberbullying to parenting to digital reputation, all of them. It's all free. It's www.ipredator.org.net or .co, no M after the CO. So it's ipredator.org.
and one last thing, what would you like to, in other words, what are your last words to
My
the audience?
My last words is, I believe, again, is cyberspace is an extension of human consciousness. What if I believe going forward, we are so enveloped with information technology. What I'm asking people to do, and you don't have to do it long, is turn off the device, put down the mobile device, the smartphone, the Android, go outside. From the moment I wake up to the moment I go to bed, okay, I am surrounded by technology, my electronic therapy notes, my medical records. What we're doing now is technology, although I think it's beneficial. I love to watch Netflix. I love to watch stuff online, but I do make it, for instance, this morning, I got offline and I went for a long bike ride. So what I'm asking your viewers and your followers to do is to make it every day, turn off the device and do something that doesn't have an electronic device involved.
Yeah, that oh, and I would like to add to that, turn off the news.
Sure. I mean,
Turn off the news. Turn off the news and stop watching these so-called reality programs.
yeah, I'm not a big fan of reality. I think they're kind of cheesy, but I'm not passing judgment on those that want to watch it. I'm just not a reality TV fan. I love my documentaries. So I do watch a lot of documentaries, whether it be on YouTube, whether it be on Netflix, so forth and so on. But again, you had asked me what would be my last piece. It would be to turn it off, not completely, not forever, but for a little while. Go spend time with your child. Go spend time with your husband, your wife, your loved one. Go outside, go fishing, go throw a ball around, do something physical, and leave the iPhone, the Android, the mobile device, leave it at home just for a little while.
Well, it certainly have been a pleasure to talk with you today.
Oh, thank you.
Renowned psychologist.
Well, if I may, I'm not renowned, but thank you for that compliment. Not that I'm looking to be renowned, but I'm just a licensed psychologist that is here trying to encourage people to practice what's called digital citizenship, and a little bit of online safety.
Digital citizenship.
Yes, well, we could do that. That'd be another show. Essentially, digital citizenship is how you conduct yourself online, as being respectful, being decent.
Yeah.
That's
We
another show.
definitely. Yeah. Most most definitely, because we there's never been a conversation about that. So yes, that would definitely be a future show about digital citizenship. So I'll get with you later. We'll set that up
Thank you.
to talk about that, because I think that is very important of how we conduct ourselves online, and by doing so, I think it will deviate some of the stress and anxiety
Most certainly,
people have endured.
and reduce your risk of being targeted online. Most certainly.
Is does that have any relationship to like human trafficking?
All of it. Yes, of course. Digital citizenship is how you conduct oneself. It's being respectful. You don't have to be a mush and a pushover, but at the same time, it's agreeing to disagree, not being ideologically extreme. Understanding that people have different, beliefs. It's not engaging. It's not, as it relates to odor. It's if you're pissed off, when you get online, is take a couple of breaths before you engage with others online. Digital citizenship, being kind, decent, and practicing humility when you're online.
And that would be a future show, ladies and gentlemen. We're gonna have a conversation about digital citizenship.
Sounds
So
great.
uh, keep an eye on the Australian Face broadcast section Facebook page for more information, about that. I would love to have you on here, and we will try to find some other, individuals who are experts in digital citizenship, how
Mhm.
to conduct yourself online. Hopefully, we will have like some type of panel or something. But if we just have one person, that's fine too, because I think people really need to know how to conduct themselves,
Mhm.
online and be great citizens of the World Wide Web. So that would be a future episode. Please keep an eye on the Australia Broadcast Section Facebook page for more information on that. Doctor, it was really great having you here today.
Oh, thank you.
And as
Thank you.
always, when we have guests on here, they come with some very valuable information. And folks, you're not going to get this information on mainstream media. You're only going to get it here. So
Okay.
thank you so much. And that will conclude uh Talk Show Presents for this week. And as always, we tend to bring guests onto this particular podcast who have expertise or experience in a topic or story that's hitting the headlines. And of course, mental health and COVID-19 are still in the news. And so that's why we're bringing this information to you. It's still in the news. Um, and that's why we bring particular guests on this particular podcast who either been following a particular news story or have an expertise in an area that is being featured on the news. So again, thank you so much. And we will see you next week for another episode of Talk Show Presents. Enjoy your Saturday.